Good morning. Welcome, everyone. I'm Councillor Chris Atwell, Chair of the Planning Committee. Limited public seating has been made available. However, this meeting is also being webcast to allow the public to attend remotely if they so wish. The public seating area is not in view of the camera used to webcast this meeting. Some housekeeping. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble by Queen Victoria statue in Guildhall Square. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust's fire marshal regulations, anyone who signed in at the Guildhall reception desk should sign out when leaving the building at the end of today's meeting. May I draw everyone's attention to the fact that this meeting will be live streamed and everyone speaking via a microphone will be on camera, including those making deputations. Members of the press and public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly they do not wish to be recorded. Please can everyone use the microphones and remember to switch them off when you have finished. Otherwise, the camera will remain on you. If there is any voting, please can members keep their hands raised clearly until the number of votes have been stated. Okay, let's make some introductions. Members?
Good morning, Chair. John Smith, East Indian Craneswater.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Linda.
Judith Smythe, St Jude Water and Vice Chair of this committee.
Thank you, Judith.
I'm Darren Sanders, Baffins Ward.
Thank you, Darren.
Gerald Vernon Jackson, Milton Ward.
Thank you, Gerald.
Councillor Russell Simpson, Hilty Ward.
Thank you, Russell.
Good morning, Chair. Councillor George Fielding, Central South Sea Ward.
And good morning to you, George. Thank you. Officers?
Good morning. Councillor Simons, you just want to turn your microphone off. Thanks. My name is Kieran Laven. I'm one of the Council's planning solicitors.
Thank you, Kieran.
Hello, I'm Simon Turner. I'm Acting Head of Development Management.
Thank you, Simon.
Karen Martin, Democratic Services.
Thank you, Karen. And if those giving deputations could introduce themselves, shall we? Who's giving a deputation? Carry on.
Carrie Ann Wells from Apicore, representing 108 Milton Road today.
Thank you.
Daryl Howells, representing Daryl Howells Planning Consultancy, speaking on item number 4.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Elizabeth Marshalsea, speaking about 92 Havant Road.
Thank you, Mrs. Marshalsea. That's everybody giving a deputation. And there are some other people in the room as well, but people giving deputations. Apologies. Councillor Hugh Mason is going to arrive a little late. He's entertaining the WI at the moment, so he will be here as soon as he can. Members, any declarations of interest? Russell?
No declarations, but I will have to be leaving today at 12:30. It's the first time ever that I'll be leaving, but unfortunately, appointment awaits.
Thank you, Russell. Hopefully we'll make some progress by then.
Apologies, I have to leave at 1 p.m.
1 p.m. Thank you, Linda. Oh, everybody.
Apologies, Chair. I shall also have to leave at 1 p.m. because I've got a conflicting work matter.
What time, George?
1 p.m.
At 1.
Thank you.
No, we may need to lock the door at this rate. Darren.
I also have to go at 1 p.m. as I've got a meeting in my ward, which is of a local community association, of which I'm a trustee, and also I will have to withdraw for 108 Milton Road as I'm the one who called it in.
Okay. Will we be quorate? You'll be here. I'll be here. We'll be here. Judith will be here.
So, sorry, I've got to chair another meeting at 1:30. So you may well not be quorate, so we'll need to move with some speed, Darren. In terms of declarations, I chair the Cabinet, and the seafront is a council project, but it's not within my portfolio, and therefore my view is that I do not have a prejudicial conflict of interest, as we've done recently.
Okay, Kieran.
The councillor has my advice on that point.
Thank you.
Chair.
Judith.
I'm on the Sea Defence's cross-party steering group. You're also dealing with my favourite part of the beach to swim on, but I don't think that's in any way a prejudicial interest. And,
No, that's fine. The steering group is sort of advisory and consultative, not decision-making, so that won't be a problem.
We could always rename it the Judith Smythe Memorial Beach.
Well,
Eddie, that's premature, I think.
okay. Right. Well, so many people going. Let's try and make some progress today. Let's get to the first item of today's substantive business. Havant Road, 92 Havant Road. Simon, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. This is an application at 92 Havant Road for the construction of a 1.5-storey side extension, a smaller infill extension at the rear, external alterations that I shall take you through in a minute, construction of a raised terraced platform, a raised terrace, garden terrace at the rear, including a swimming pool. So the application's up there in Drayton on the Havant Road. Very suburban environment with houses set back from the road, Havant Road, and from the side road, Mulberry Lane, including on Mulberry Lane here on both sides. A suburban environment. It's the corner property you can see outlined in red. Just in a bit more detail there. That is the side extension that is proposed. And then the other alterations and extensions and so on are around the rest of the building. I shall quickly take you to further down in the slideshow just to show the front and rear of the property. Yeah, okay, thank you. Should come back in a sec. That's the front of the property, hidden by vegetation there at least. So brick and timber framing, that sort of thing. Suburban property. That's also from Havant Road, the other side of the front there. You can see the existing gap down the side, and Mulberry Lane descending there on the left-hand side, south. And then, just trying to find a photo of the rear. There's the rear, so that's looking up north along Mulberry Lane. That's the property on the left-hand side, and the area of the extension is at this point here. I'll flick through back to the top of the show. There we are, back to that slide. So there's the site. The substantial 1.5-storey extension is on this side here, as you can see, up to the boundary at that point, just a bit off there because of the splayed boundary. And then we have a raised terrace at the rear, south facing, and a pool there. So there's the property you've seen as existing a few moments ago in the photograph. Suburban property, brick, half-timbered, etc. That's the minor gap in the rear elevation that they seek to fill. So you can see in terms of the extension, this is the proposed extension. You can just about make out perhaps a dotted line, which I'm trying to follow there, sorry for the wiggles, which is the previous refusal set out in the report due to the proximity and scale to the suburban character of Mulberry Lane. So the extension has been reduced in height to try and address that previous refusal. Otherwise, as mentioned, external alterations, a conjunction of external alterations across the site. So the forward gable there, the half timber, etc., would be replaced largely with this new glazing feature on the front. The property would be rendered, and new window apertures and new windows, as you can see as well, changing. So a significant change to the overall appearance of the property, although its basic form remains the same, apart from the side extension. And then to the rear, you can make out here the terrace. That, I think, is the pergola, so that's see-through, if you like. That's the terrace there, and the minor infill. On plan form, it is essentially a building here in the gap to the side boundary, which would be the new garage there. It's quite tall. So it would have storage space in the roof. We've had discussions with the applicant We couldn't reach agreement. We were asking for this scheme to come a further metre off from the boundary and a further metre lower eaves, just to try and reduce the impact on that suburban lane. Some changes already in evidence at the site: removal of vegetation, which doesn't require planning consent, and foundations put in for the proposal already. So you can see the position on the edge of the site that would appear. So there's the front boundary, northern corner from Havant Road, and the location of the extension to the side. There's that's on the edge of the site, as you can see. And there's, as was on Mulberry Lane, with the vegetation, and one has to picture now what will be proposed on the corner there. That's the long and short of the application. We have deputations, and there's no update on the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Simon. Mrs. Marshalsea, you're here to give a deputation. Objecting to the application. You have 6 minutes to give your deputation.
Good morning, everybody. We raise an objection to the proposals for a side extension to the east elevation and for the swimming pool. We agree overall with the points made by the planning officer in the previous summary. We refer to point 7 in the summary of main issues, which states that the applicant was offered advice prior to resubmission, which was to further reduce the height and width of the side extension by specified amounts. We consider that this was a generous compromise towards the applicant, which we would have found acceptable. However, the advice was ignored, and furthermore, foundations were constructed several months ago. The proposal is described as a 1.5-storey extension. The reality is that it would be equivalent to a 2-storey extension when the height of the proposed roof is taken into account. The width is unchanged and the footprint unmodified. Therefore, the proposed extension would not sit comfortably in the plot. It offers very minimal improvement from the previous application in terms of height, bulk, linear appearance and prominence on the streetscape, whether viewed from Havant Road, Burrell Avenue or Mulberry Lane. We consider that the proposed extension would result in a significant loss of visual amenity because of its size, scale and situation at the highest point of Mulberry Lane, a pleasant and characterful street. The size and scale of the proposed extension would be oppressive, particularly the high roof, which would be especially prominent because Mulberry Lane runs uphill from south to north and the site is situated at its highest point. The proximity of the proposed east elevation, where it faces onto the west side of Mulberry Lane, would present a large high wall with no visual interest, which would be unsatisfactory. It is of considerable significance that there is an application outstanding for a 2-storey side extension to the west elevation of number 94 Havant Road, which is situated on the opposite corner of Mulberry Lane from number 92. If both proposals were passed, this would compound the potentially closed-in appearance at the top of Mulberry Lane. The visual impact statement submitted by CAAD. This document compares the proposal for 92 Havant Road to other developments on corner plots on the south side of Havant Road, in particular number 154 Havant Road, a development much less substantial in size and situated on the west corner of Tregarron Avenue, a road considerably wider than Mulberry Lane. Mulberry Lane is a very narrow road, particularly at its north end, where its junction with Havant Road is found. It opens onto one of the narrowest sections of the Havant Road located within the city boundary. In contrast, Tregarron Avenue is a wider and flatter road, opening onto a wide section of Havant Road. It is not, therefore, an appropriate or relevant comparison. The swimming pool. This would be a raised structure and significantly above the ground level of our own property. We are concerned that possible ground movement or failure of the structure could pose a significant risk to life and property if the water were to escape, bearing in mind the extremely heavy weight of water contained in a structure of such considerable volume and also the downhill slope of the site. We consider that the application fails to meet the requirements of Local Plan Policy PCS 23 and in particular the following clauses. Excellent architectural quality in new buildings and changes to existing buildings. Appropriate scale, density, layout, appearance and materials in relation to a particular context. Protection of amenity and the provision of a good standard of living environment for neighbouring and local occupiers, as well as future residents and users of the development. In summary, the revised proposal fails to significantly address the reasons given for refusal of the previous proposal. It would be extremely oppressive, crowded and incongruent in appearance due to its size, its scale and its prominent situation. We believe that a more acceptable proposal would be a single-storey extension in accordance with the advice offered to the applicant by the planning officer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Marshalsea. I did have some other people down to give deputations, and I'm wondering whether you've just arrived. Okay. Well, well, I changed the agenda. Would you like to introduce yourselves? The microphone's just in front of you. If you just press the button in front of you.
Hello, my name's Daniel Byrne. I'm the applicant.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Sarah Roberts, the agent from Critchley Architecture and Design.
Thank you very much. Well, you've arrived in the nick of time because this is your moment. Are you ready to present?
Yeah.
If I start first.
So you have 6 minutes.
I don't got to take that long.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to speak today in regards to my application to build my new family home. This is not being done as a development. It's been created for me, myself, and my partner and my children to live. Having acquired the home in May 2022, we set out on creating our dream family home. Having looked at the road and its eclectic style of housing, zero consistency to approach of style, we felt there would be no issues with our plan design. A modern, large detached home bringing a mismatch of two dwellings together using 154 Havant Road as a prime precedent. We applied to build a side extension of 2.5 in height to create a consistent roofline, and by dropping the ugly gable end, as you can see on the slide up there, reducing the height and impact of the main house and removing the overlooking windows onto the main road. The first application was dismissed out of hand and rejection issued. As of no point were we consulted that we were permitted or able to negotiate, leaving us in a position either to reapply, hence the second application, or to appeal. We obviously decided to reapply so we could move on with the development, hoping to get a successful result of the second application. We then asked Alison Pinckney to come to site to talk about the rejection and what may be permitted and the out-of-hand rejection on the application one. It was a very shrug-of-the-shoulder attitude. I just don't really like what was here, to be honest with you. I felt it was just declined to push their problem down the road rather than us get into a position where we could talk about how we could negotiate, what we could do to come to a positive resolution for all parties. At no point have we never been happy to negotiate or talk, but we found obviously communication to be very, very poor from the planning department and ultimately pushed away at every opportunity. We therefore agreed to reduce the height of the extension and put in a new application. We were under immense pressure to put in the new application, and while trying to get the second application right, we were told that we were no longer to be able to consult with Alison past a certain deadline. While I sound the planning department's attitude very unhelpful and disappointing is an understatement, I want to frankly build the best looking house in the street from a modern style perspective, not create an ugly mismatch of property but something of architectural merit, albeit modern and perhaps not in keeping with the whole of the street. From my perspective, we're not trying to build anything that has not been done or created before along Havant Road, but I only want to better the quality of what has previously been done for the betterment of the dwelling, the road and the city. As a main road, we visit our city using Havant Road daily. It will show the involvement and the forward-thinking nature of our city. The driving factor for this build was how the property looks. Externally, making sure windows are symmetrical, balanced, and in fact, the external look is a detriment to the internal layout in many situations. But again, how it looks in the street scene has been part of all of our conversations throughout the process. I have previous experience of creating homes to this standard, having done something very similar in London Road, Cosham, opposite QA Hospital. In the prevailing years, the 5 surrounding houses have all now been refurbished to a similar standard, dramatically improving the street scene. And I believe what I'm trying to do at number 92 Havant Road will have the same effect on other homeowners locally. From a personal perspective, I don't think any consideration has been taken into the reduction of the ugly gable, taking the ugly gable away and the overlooking windows at the corner on the corner of Mulberry Lane and Havant Road, and changing the roof direction, sloping away from the boundary rather than having it hard up against the existing boundary. We have one objection for a neighbour who lives in a previous who lives south of the potential development. The majority of the objections there that have been put forward are building regulation objections. Swimming pool might flood, might crack, might leak, etc., etc. Loss of natural light was brought up. It's north of that actual dwelling, so that's obviously somewhat relevant. But again, no one's frankly interested. Most of the neighbours want it finished, want it done, and are quite excited to see it sort of brought to fruition, to be honest with you. I'd love to get a positive outcome so we can push on with the bill, but if we don't, obviously we need to look at the no choice to continue to appeal, because we feel that strongly about it. There's so much precedent down the road. There's no consistent approach down the road, down Havant Road in particular. And the look of what we're trying to create does offer architectural merit, in my opinion, albeit not to everyone's cup of tea because it is modern. But we are evolving, we are moving forward, and I think it will showcase the area, to be honest with you, in the road. So that's pretty much all I wanted to say today. Also, a little bit off the hop by being a couple of minutes late there, so apologies for that.
Thank you, Mr. Byrne. Okay.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair, for giving us the opportunity to speak today. So as I summarised before, I'm speaking as the agent from Critchley Architecture and Design. And as the applicant, Mr. Byrne, has just summarised, the proposal is essentially for a single-storey side extension, which will be for a garage with a pitched roof over, which will be used as storage space. As Dan had started to explain, we used number 154 as a precedent, which was decided back in 2019 under the same local plan that's currently issued. The house is on a corner plot, so both 154 and 92, the subject site, were both on corner plots, so we thought this was a suitable application site to take precedence from. At number 154, they did a full 2.5-storey side extension, which is within 1 metre of the boundary. The roof was not subservient in any way. It had a gable end and 3 large balconies to the rear. And within this delegated report, back in 2019, I'll quote from the report. It says, as amended, the proposal is an acceptable design which will look appropriate in the street scene. Although the house will look very different from the existing, there is a variety of architectural styles in the area, and the existing building is not of any architectural merit. The house, as extended, still sits comfortably within the plot and maintains the same building line in the Havant Road. The simplification of the front elevation is an improvement in terms of design and the change of materials to include natural grey slate for all roofing, which will accentuate the cleaner lines. Section 1.7 of the delegated report explains that the case officer advised further to reduce the overall height and width of the proposed side extension. As the applicant was just saying, we did reduce this and submitted it. However, we did not see that it would be necessary to reduce it down to a complete single storey, given the decision issued at number 154. As explained previously, the additional height in the garage is proposed for storage, as there's no loft space in the house itself, and therefore there'll be no windows and no overlooking issues to neighbours. Section 5.5 of the committee report states that the extension would result in development across the entire width of the plot, resulting in a cramped and incongruous addition to the street scene, given its proximity to the eastern boundary. The reduced sense of space by building so close to the boundary would be to the detriment of the open character of the junction, whether approaching from Havant Road or Mulberry Lane. This would be contrary to the policy PSC 23 of the Portsmouth Plan. So in response to this, this is no different to other corner plots in the area. Hopefully the visual impact assessment has been made available to everyone today to see beforehand. There are other examples in the area. The house is not listed and it's not in a conservation area or any other designated area. As explained for number 154, the same applies to this application, where the case officer actually stated there is a variety of architectural styles in the area and the existing building is not of any architectural merit. So as number 154 was decided in 2019 under the same local plan, we feel the two assessments made are in direct conflict to each other. The extension follows the building line for Havant Road, and the proposals also include making improvement to the boundary treatments and replanting to visually enhance the site from both the Havant Road and Mulberry Road. As the applicant was explaining previously, the mass and bulk of the existing roof has already been substantially reduced by removing the dormer windows. We've removed the gable end to form a hipped roof, both of which were overlooking to Mulberry Lane. Other corner plots along the Havant Road include developments within 1 metre of the boundary, and this includes a 3-storey building which is used as a care home on the corner of Havant Road and Court Lane. So hopefully you've seen the visual impact assessment where we've got the full 3 stories building on this corner. Therefore, the single-storey garage extension proposed seems subservient to the local context. The committee report confirms that the proposals do not cause any loss of light and there is no loss of outlook or privacy caused by the side extension. Therefore, the suggested reason for refusal is subjective in nature and out of keeping with other decisions in the local area, which is why we're hoping to bring this forward to the committee for your assessment. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Members, the visual impact assessment, it might be useful just to circulate while we're asking questions and doing other things. So would you mind?
I haven't got the whole report with me. I just printed off some of the local images because I was hoping that everyone would have had the opportunity to see the report beforehand.
Well,
but I'm happy to circulate the images as these also have...
That'd be useful. If
Yep.
you could circulate what you've got. While we carry. Okay. Kieran.
Before we go any further, I just note that Councillor has just left the room, so won't be able to participate any further. And Councillor Mason, you were slightly late turning up for the original officer report, so I would advise you not to participate in this item as well. Wait for the second.
I'm aware that I have no right to vote since I arrived late.
Do you have any interest as well, whilst I'm speaking to you?
Chairman, I have no interest to declare for this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. Okay, members, questions? Councillor Sanders.
Thanks, Chris. Simon, what is the status of 154 Havant Road? Because it looks as if the applicant has ignored your advice to reduce things by a story on the grounds that 154 did it, so therefore we can. What is was the planning status of 154?
Thank you, Councillor. Sorry about that. Oh, that's better. It's approved and built, as you can see here. This is about 4 or 5 streets further along to the east, so it's not the immediate character. So we didn't agree that it was the most immediate character and therefore necessarily the best option, because as you see from the street you've seen earlier, I can show you again, the character immediately surrounding the application property is not quite like this. This road is wider than the Mulberry Lane, doesn't have the same suburban and attractive character, it's quite the same way. You've seen the previous image we've showed looking at Mulberry Lane. It has a bigger development on the side here with the 3-storey flats. So at first glance, the applicant thought it was comparable, but we didn't think so. I don't think it's a great consent either, actually, candidly. This is the similar position in terms of rising land and a property built to the corner, to the edge of the site, and look how prominent it is. That sort of illustrates the harm that we are seeking to avoid. And then there's a question mark also about the design, whether or not you think that's appropriate, and does this render and these windows fit in with the locality. So I don't think this helps the applicant's case.
Thank you for that. I have one more question, Chris, if I may. You mentioned in the report that the pending application at 94 is material to this decision. If we go with your recommendation, which is to refuse, how and what does that do to that application? Does that affect that application in any way? Does that affect the impact of that application in any way?
Whatever decisions taken on the current planning application at number 92 will become a material consideration, because that will be it'll either be built or it's a live application due to be built in the next 3 years. So we will have to take the decision on today's application into account when we do determine 94 opposite.
Right. Okay, those are my questions, Chris.
Thank you, members. Any further questions before we move to comments?
I wish to move the officer recommendation to refuse the application. I do not believe that the reasons for refusal have been satisfied, and looking at those drawings about 154, I personally agree with the planning officer. I can't comment on the nature of the previous consent, but a refusal on the grounds outlined in the report.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Byrne-Jackson.
Happy to second.
Okay, we've got a proposal and a seconder. Any other views on this application? I shall move to the vote. Those in favour of the officer's recommendation to refuse? And those against? And abstentions? Okay, thank you.
Planning Permission is refused in line with the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Kieran. Okay.
Chairman.
Simon.
Sorry to interrupt. Could I just say one thing? Some accusations were made about the case officer. I don't agree with those accusations, just for the record. I don't agree with them at all, and I was involved as well.
Thank you, Simon. Let's move on to the next application, which is the former Royal British Legion property. Item 4, I think. Simon, when you're ready.
Thank you, Chairman. This is an application. We have the applicant's agent here to speak, and I have a minor SMAT update to do at the... Well, I'll do it now, shall I? Just to make sure I don't forget. So on page 2 of the SMAT item 4, we've received an extra letter of objection since publication on the grounds of insufficient parking. The objector believes parking in 6th Avenue is absolutely awful, including sometimes double parking. Wimmering Methodist Church fears its private car park will be used by new residents. I'll point out that car park in a moment. We've covered the issue already in the report. We don't consider that the matter of parking is a reason to refuse planning consent, so no change to the recommendation. The application is at the Royal British Legion in Cosham, which has been shut for some time now. According to council tax records, it was closed in January 2021. It may have been a bit earlier than that, sort of practically, but from council tax records anyway, that's a firm date as well. 6th Avenue up in Cosham, just west of Cosham Town Centre. So it proposes the demolition of the existing building and the construction of a predominantly 3-storey, but with a top roof storey giving 4, to provide 23 flats with car parking and bicycle storage. So just to orientate members, Cosham Town Centre is to the east, I think 700 metres away. That's Southampton Road running east-west, and the hospital just to the northeast over here. 6th Avenue runs up north-south. You can't get through in a vehicle onto Southampton Road. Quite a few of the roads here are blocked off from Southampton Road, given its scale, I suppose. So it's the flat roof, single storey, very low-key, squat building of the former social club here. And it is surrounded by a mixture of developments. We've got 3-storey, I think, municipal, or previously municipal housing blocks here. 3-storey. The levels rise from south to north, and so you'll see in photographs the 3-storey element sails out a bit here, and it's quite a tall building. Wimmering Church, an attractive building. Block of flats here. A community building here, and then some, I think also municipal formerly housing here, quite attractive, rough cast and brick, and some more modern development to the west behind the site. In case we don't see another aerial photograph, we've got trees on the western side, just outside the site in this area here. That's why it's empty, apparently. They're protected trees. And then we've got some conifers just outside the site on the southern boundary here in next door's garden. We'll get some better pictures. This is looking north up 6th Avenue. So there's the nearest neighbour with the rough cast and the brick I mentioned. The rising land, there's the conifer on the southern boundary just outside the site. You can just about make out the social club. And there's the 3-storey flats to the north rising up because of the outsail over the land. Here's looking south down 6th Avenue. So there's the social club there. Here are the flats. And this is Herne Road running east-west. So there's on-street parking on Herne Road, double yellow lines on the site frontage, and otherwise on-street parking in the area. So this is looking at the eastern edge of the site. There's the next door property to the south. And this is the eastern flank of the post-war development facing the rear of the social club. So that gable end is there. Just some more pictures. So there's the site on the left-hand side. Materials, quite a bright brick, I think it is, and some fairly buffy, lightish brick there. I mention that now because of the materials proposed by the applicant. Here's the development sailing out, giving almost a 4th storey because of the land levels there. That's the blocked-off entrance to Southampton Road. This is Herne Road, so there's the social club. We're looking east, that's the social club on that side. There's the church, very attractive building, and its car park just there with an access off 6th Avenue. So the car park fronts onto Southampton Road. 3-storey block of flats, the 2-storey community building use, and then the housing, 2-storey housing. Right, onto the development. Here are the trees you can see that I pointed out earlier, and to the south as well. So it's an L-shaped block, front door onto 6th Avenue, and a core all the way through to get out into the back and to walk around it, either into the car park or round into a substantial bike store. So it follows the building or the back of pavement effectively, with an undercroft here to take you to the parking spaces here, a bit of a garden space, and 2 more spaces, car parking spaces off Herne Road. The application was amended during its course to take off 4 flats, which also enabled more parking to get a better balance of flats to parking. The pattern of development is a central corridor with flats either facing the rear or to the front. And they're a mixture of 1- and 2-bedroom flats. That's the ground floor again. Here's the first floor, so there's the full footprint of development. Flats looking mostly front onto 6th Avenue, Herne Road, or south and west onto the rear of the site. A couple of minor secondary windows there that will be addressed by frosted glazing. So here's the 3rd floor, so 3 full floors, if you like, or nearly full floors of development. And this is the 4th floor, you'll see in a minute on an elevation. So it's recessed from the front, so it's a true roof additional floor, if you like. So bigger flats with their own terraces. There's a terrace for that flat, there's a terrace for the 2nd flat, and a terrace front and back for the 3rd flat there. The other there is a flat roof just for maintenance access only. This is what I call the principal elevation on 6th Avenue, so from the south heading up north up to Southampton Road with the increase in level across the side. So this building also will need to slightly cut in and sail out at the other end, just like the flats. So this is a light-coloured brick proposed. We would, if approved, deal with that by way of condition in terms of final selection. We've got a series of bays that provide interest to the site. This one looks a little bit flat, but you'll see in a moment a better 3D. A base material, common practice, a darker base material to ground the site, and then a slate effect cladding to the recessed roof. So it would be pretty much read as a 3-storey building because of the recess of the roof. although it will be seen. That's the front door. And that's the northern elevation to Herne Road, more of the same, really. Flats and habitable rooms. Just for completeness, that's the southern elevation, so that's the gable end next to the neighbour to the south, and that is the western elevation facing across the gardens. That's the bike store, and there's its door. There you are in a bit more context. The 3, almost 4-storey here, and the 2-storey housing to the south. And this is along Herne Road. There's a 3D to get a slightly better feel. So we've got also architectural details. For example, apart from the articulation provided by these bays will be good, give good shadow, etc., and interest to the building, along with the choice of materials, and then the depth of reveals to the windows will also be important. I think the building will actually look quite good. It's come to committee because of 18 addresses objecting, a variety of points which are set out in the report. But officers are satisfied about the scale of development, the adequacy of living arrangements, the lack of impact or reasonable impact on the neighbouring area and amenities, and the level of car parking in its sustainable location. So that is why we're able to recommend it positively for you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Mr. Howells, you have 6 minutes to give your deputation.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman. I am the owner of Darrell Howells Planning Consultancy, and I'm here to represent the applicant for the proposed development for the demolition of the existing social club and the erection of a block of 23 flats laid over 4 floors with on-site car parking, bin and cycle storage. Firstly, I'd like to thank your Principal Planning Officer, Mr. Michael Lee, for his proactive and proactive engagement with us following the reallocation of the application from the original officer. Mr. Lee has been supportive, communicative and offered constructive solutions to problems he identified during the consideration of the application. That consideration has led to the recommendation to approve as justified in this robust planning report presented today. As you have heard, the existing social club closed several years ago, so the redevelopment of the site for housing now constitutes sustainable development as set out in planning policy of your own core strategy and the government's national planning policy framework. The proposal will provide 23 flats that comprise 8 number 1 bedrooms and 15 2-bedroom flats, thereby offering a mix of accommodation for the intended occupiers, resulting in a sustainable community. The provision of the 23 flats will positively contribute to the housing stock in the area and offer economic benefits to nearby businesses, services and the locality. Your officers have tested the viability of the scheme to ascertain whether any affordable housing can be delivered. However, regrettably, due to the current market conditions, including the increased cost of materials, energy demands and labour, nil contributions can be secured. The application site is located in a residential area that comprises houses and blocks of flats of varying architectural design, style and palette of materials. In terms of storey heights, the housing to the south and west are 2-storey, to the east 2 and 3-storey, and to the north there are 3-storey blocks of flats with undercroft garaging, so totalling 4 stories. Our proposal is in part a 3- and 4-storey building predominantly. However, the building drops to 2-storey adjacent to number 23 to the south. The 3rd and 4th storey is positioned 12.5 metres from number 23, so will cause no overbearing whatsoever. The layout of the flat at number 12 is positioned at first floor over the vehicle access, as you've heard, but has been amended so there is no overlooking to the immediate neighbour that would harm their privacy. Just a matter of point, the southern elevation that Mr. Turner presented to you was actually the incorrect one. That was the original version. That elevation has been changed to remove the central window. The external design of the flatted scheme has been drawn to positively contribute towards the range of buildings within the Cosham area. The scheme has been designed to address the topography of the site and to turn the corner from 6th Avenue into Herne Road, and does so very successfully, in my professional opinion. You have heard that the living conditions of the intended occupiers will be well catered for by reason of spacious, well-lit flats and provision of external areas. As I mentioned before, no harm to neighbouring amenities will occur. The proposal is located in a highly sustainable location with excellent accessibility to shops, services and public transport and the highway network. On the site there will be provision of 26 car parking spaces and 42 bicycle spaces. Whilst the car parking provision is marginally lower than preferred, your highway officer and your principal planning officer has determined that in planning terms, the sustainable location of the site plus the housing delivery of 23 flats are afforded greater weight as material considerations than the omission of the 8 car parking spaces. The scheme can provide biodiversity enhancements, and the site will increase opportunities for hard and soft landscaping to improve the appearance of the site within its context, and over its current condition. The application was one of careful consideration from the outset by the architect, myself and other members of the design team. That careful planning has meant many of your consultees support the application. Those consultees include the Highway Authority, the Ecology Officer, Drainage Officer, to name a few. These responses demonstrate that the scheme does indeed accord with adopted planning policies, and I would ask you to support the officer's recommendation to approve. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Howes. Members? Questions on this application? Judith.
I've got a question about the landscaping and trees and things. There are trees around the site. Is there any way we can make sure they remain? What control could we have over that? And I noticed there's a condition on the recommendation for the permission about landscaping. Is anything being done to create more space where rainfall could go directly into the ground and where there could be other planting? Can we have a look at the planting scheme again, please? Seems to me it's not quite enough.
Thank you, Councillor. Answering the question about the trees, there would be some minor trimming of the adjacent cherry just to the west of the site, which isn't deemed to be a difficulty for the health of that tree into the future. The trees on the southern boundary here, because of the gap, are unlikely to require any trimming either. But again, although they're quite prominent trees, they're not protected trees. I don't see any difficulty if any minor working space, for example, was needed to reduce the canopy somewhat. That would need to be in conjunction, obviously, with the neighbour. And we do have the planning condition relating to tree protection during the course of the site. So the tree matters, I think, have been looked at correctly in terms of existing trees. In terms of rainfall infiltration and nature conservation and landscape, I think there'll be a betterment here, which is what the Environment Agency and is the general concept any planning authority would seek with new development. The betterment would be because at the moment the site has drainage dating from, the 60s or 70s, and I don't think there's any real infiltration on the site presently. This will at least have a relatively small lawn, but nevertheless a lawn, which will clearly take some soaking in. And then we will have a full drainage scheme for the wider site anyway, to make sure that the appropriate betterment and the best measures that can be provided are provided. And we've consulted with our drainage consultants, our drainage officer, on that. So he's happy with that, and full details will come in with a condition. And then in terms of landscaping, beyond the grassed area, or shown as grass at the moment, that could have some hedging or shrubs put in there. For example, there's not a huge amount of space left for further planting. I mean, the site will still benefit from the background softening, if you like, of the existing trees. There's some space probably here in this corner for a shrub, for example, and some shrub is planted there. I think there's just about enough space to get something on the front there and something here as well. So the site is providing what it can. And in terms of nature conservation, obviously we'd have an idea to the most appropriate species in terms of native nectar, flowering, etc.
Are the solar panels and other environmental things included in this, and is it appropriate that that comes into a planning application?
There's not been any submission on that, but of course, well, we've got a planning condition that asks to look at that, which will go hand in hand with the building regulations anyway. So the building will need, and building regulations are to a high standard, always improving periodically. So the site could perhaps have photovoltaic panels, but that remains to be seen. We've talked before in different committees, haven't we, about different sites, different horses for courses and so on. So in due course, the building will need to provide a good standard of sustainable construction and heating and cooling, etc., etc.
Does that answer the question? Darren and then Hugh.
Thanks, Chris. I know height's going to be difficult, Simon, in this road because it's on a slope. But is the proposed scheme taller than the church? Which seems to me the tallest building in the area. Excuse me.
That's the church on the left-hand side. I'd have to guess, Councillor, the church, of course, has got, it looks like 2 stories, but it's a church building, you know, with different height, of course. And you can compare the height to the 3-story building adjacent. So I would guess the eaves height of the church building would be about the eaves height of the 3-story main body of the building, of course, with the flat roof, recessed roof above. It's certainly within the scale of that building and the flats, the 3/4-story flats to the north and to there. So if that's what your question is about, it fits in with the scale of the area. It would be on slightly lower land than the church as well.
It is. So thank you for that, Simon. My other point concerns what you say in 10.12 and 10.13 of the report, particularly in 10.13. It's around whether the scheme's viable, as you describe it, the developer's expected profit. In 10.13, you say the LPA's further analysis suggests that both a scheme with and without affordable housing may not reach the reasonable profit level. Now, we don't get many of those comments. So my guess is that you believe, the applicant may not, but you believe that the current scheme will not reach the reasonable profit level. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, those are my questions. Chris.
Thank you, Darren. Hugh.
2 slightly divergent questions. The first one follows up something that Councillor Smythe was saying. How will the car park be drained? Because I noticed that a number of the considerations brought forward by residents are of flooding from this site. So how will the car park be drained?
Thank you, Councillor. I don't have, because they've not worked up a detailed scheme, I don't think. I'm not aware of that. So I don't think we have full details at present. But again, because our drainage officer, knows the site, knows the issues in the whole city, some of the issues in the north of the city that I know members are concerned about, and will have looked at this particular site, including its topography. And if the site currently has a drainage problem, this is the opportunity to rectify it. The details will come in with the detailed drainage condition 9, which will look at infiltration rates, areas of porous paving. So almost certainly that car park would have an element of porous paving. The lawn would be porous, and any hard drainage, if you like, pipes and so on, would clearly also need to be designed for that site to make sure that runoff is not too fierce in the event of a storm and so on, running onto the site or into the drains, and with the local topography in mind as well. So I'm confident that we will look carefully at full details of the drainage, and there will be a betterment at the site.
Right, okay. I'll take your word on that. The second one concerns design. Can you bring up the site, the view as seen from Herne and Sixth? Yes, that'll be fine. What one notices in this is that the fenestration of the top story does not align with that of the lower 3 stories. Will this be visible from the road surface because it does look slightly incongruous when you see it sideways on in the plan.
Thank you, Councillor. I personally don't think it's so important because of the setback, which you can see here. That's a decent setback. It's a good couple of metres, I think, by eye. That's quite significant. Lots of rooftops are only set back by a limited, half a metre or something like that, or not at all even. So that is a strong setback that is hard to represent in 2D, but it will be very recessive. So taking the east elevation, standing, this is the view you'd get from first or second floor and the flats opposite, rather from the public realm where you'd be lower down and looking up. But I don't think it matters, to answer your question, that there's, for example, there's not a windows directly above this bay, because it's a different element of the building with a different cladding, etc., and set back. So I don't think it's problematic at all. And if we have a look at the 3D, again, when you see it at an angle, again, it matters less, in my opinion, whether or not there's something there as opposed to there. So that's what I think.
Any other questions, members? Before we move to comments, Councillor Sanders.
Chris, I propose that we defer a decision on this application until the 12th of April committee meeting. This is on the grounds of paragraphs 1012 and 1013 alone. My view from what I've seen is that I think this site should be developed. However, we have got really for the first time since the Kingston Prison development a situation whereby a scheme with and without affordable housing, the scheme that was presented to the committee, may not reach the reasonable profit level, which in normal language means it's not regarded as viable in planning terms. I understand the officer's desire to have the negotiations around how much affordable housing after a decision is taken, but I think that given that we're in a situation whereby any scheme at the moment, with or without affordable housing, won't reach viability or the expected developer profit level, it seems sensible to have those discussions and then have the outcome of those discussions come back to a committee in 3 weeks, because we can't carry on for months with this. But I think a sensible period of discussion before a meeting would be useful.
Well, is 3 weeks a sensible...
I mean, it's all up to whether Simon and the team can cope with that, and I'd be grateful for his comments on that, because it is 3 weeks. Well, but the alternative is either it's going to be decided in June or July, and I think that's not fair on anyone.
Okay, Gerald, you indicated.
I think that's sensible, and happy to support it.
I think that's sensible as well. I was also very worried about this sort of looseness around affordable housing. This would make an extremely good affordable housing block in entirety. That would be a really nice solution. But also there must be other ways in which we can make sure that developers do put affordable housing at the top of the list, and these two paragraphs makes it look as if they're not.
Members? Well, I'm happy to defer for 3 weeks and bring the application back on the 12th of April.
But with the proviso that 3 weeks is used to come up with a solution to affordable housing, so that when it comes back to us, that we can actually make a decision.
I mean, in 3 weeks, is that going to be long enough?
It's fairly tight because of the lead-in and the bank holidays over Easter affecting the publication. It's fairly tight.
When do we come back?
No, we keep going. Planning doesn't stop just for an election, Christopher.
So it's the 31st of May is the following committee, which is why we wanted to bring it to assist the applicant and so on to this one, albeit with the uncertainty, a degree of uncertainty around the affordable housing. We wanted to ask if it could be left to officers to negotiate, to see if we could negotiate some form of affordable housing. That would still be our preference.
So I think the committee thinks otherwise. But Gerald?
So, in terms of papers and things like that, we can update up on the day with the supplementary matters paper, so that it gives 3 full weeks to be able to negotiate. And if that I think the rest of us will be working bank holidays, so I'm sure that's available for everybody else.
And as a way forward, as the person who's proposed this, as a way forward, Simon, I would suggest that actually the report as it stands is wonderful in terms of actually just coming back to us, because that plus your comments today are all fine, as far as I can see. So it is literally just something in the supplementary matters around the outcome of those negotiations, which I think will reduce the hassle that you've rightly identified.
Yes, there seems to be a preference for 3 weeks. It seems to be making a rod for your own back, potentially, in terms of the bank holidays for officers to get all the materials together. And I defer entirely to the planning officer, because it's him that's going to have to dealing with this, not me. But yeah.
Yeah, well, it will be a tall order. We would do everything we can. I'm sure the applicant will assist, because they would also like their application determined. If it doesn't make the 12th of April because it's difficult time-wise, then the following one is the 31st of May.
Sorry, Chris, that may have to be the case, but I'm always nervous about appeals for non-determination, which is why I'm suggesting 3 weeks, because I think that will give a sensible time period. But that's ultimately up to yourselves and the applicant as to what we see in 3 weeks' time.
Okay, Judith, and then we'll...
I think one of the important things that the applicant takes away from this discussion is that we do really need affordable housing, and we do have a policy on affordable housing. This site doesn't include some of the reasons why that might not be possible, like very contaminated land or historic buildings or some other details. So we do want this question to be answered seriously, please.
Yes, okay, right, so the application is deferred until the 12th of April.
Chair, sorry, procedurally, no, it's a motion arising from Councillor Sanders, seconded by Vernon Jackson.
We vote?
We'll need to give reasons for your deferral, so it seems that further negotiation of detail concerning the viability appraisal.
Correct. It is essentially the negotiations that are outlined in paragraph 10.13 of the report can be done before a determination is made, given the planning officer's view that the current scheme and any scheme with affordable housing doesn't meet the expected developer profit level.
Okay.
And that was seconded by Councillor Vernon Jackson, I believe.
Those in favour of the motion? And against? Okay, thank you.
So that application has been deferred until the next meeting. 7 in favour, 2 against.
Chair, I know we have a backlog of applications. I'm worried about a 7-week gap between committee meetings between the 12th of April and the 31st of May. Is there the possibility of putting in another planning committee in that period? It might be that we don't change municipal years until a little bit after the election. Is it possible to put one in? So I'm just trying to think of clearing the backlog, and life doesn't stop just because there's been an election.
Well, I'll go away and have a think about that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Let's move on. Seafront. The Seafront application, Simon.
Thank you, Chairman. We have actually 3 applications for the seafront. The major one is a variation of condition, that is to amend plans, i.e. minor amendments to the scheme for subfrontage 5. And the next 2 are associated, of course, for the relocation of lamp columns and shelters, respectively, as listed building applications. So just to be very clear for members, the flood defence scheme, of course, is of utmost importance to the island of Portsmouth, Portsea Island. and it is well known about the discussions with the Environment Agency and the very important flood defence schemes that have come forward over the years. The major scheme in 2019 was approved for the 4.5 kilometre frontage across Southsea from Longmoat, Curtin in the west across to Eastney in the east. The main elements of that application, I'll give you a picture to look at. The main application elements in that were very briefly engineering design to deal with sea level change and climate change, sea level rise and climate change, I should say, typically a bolstering of the top of the beach, in particular with the rock toe, which was buried rock defensives and substantial steel piles at the top of the beach, backing onto the promenade, that sort of location all along, and the new beach profile above that. The promenade was to be raised by 80 centimetres along this section, and with various amendments, of course, to hard and soft landscaping, levels, ramps and steps and so on, the shelters and lamps. That, in a very brief nutshell, were the approved sea defence works at subfrontage 5, which, by the way, runs further east, and we're looking at the western third or half of subsection 5 from the pyramids and the eastern side of Southsea Castle along to the end of Speaker's Corner here, just this area. The scheme is necessary, of course, to protect thousands of businesses and thousands of homes from sea flooding and all the resulted problems that, of course, would arise. It's just a brief slide there to remind people of some of the storm events that have happened in more recent years. So, having very briefly set out what the original approved scheme was 3 years ago, 3 years ago, that scheme was on the back of the first tranche of funding from government, and once the first application had been approved, it was always known there would be another round of amendments for more detailed and refinement and more engineering, etc. So the first planning permission granted at the end of 2019 then unlocked the second half of the government funding, which allowed the council and its partners to go on to work on the further refinement of the engineering, which is what is in front of you today. So that naturally has resulted, and was always expected to result in, some changes to some of the details of the scheme, in this case subsection 5. So the report sets out at bullet points in paragraph 12 the 4, broadly speaking, areas: removal of the rock toe, improved public realm, soft landscaping, and reduced interaction with Southsea Castle, which is a scheduled ancient monument. So I shall try and take you through the principal changes. They're quite detailed and complicated drawings, but I'll make it as straightforward and digestible as possible. Starting from the west, there's Southsea Castle and its eastern ramparts, grass banks and so on, and there's the pyramids just to its north. That was the approved scheme 3 years ago, which had a certain ramp riding up from in front of the pyramids up to the height of the promenade. That's been changed to, I think, follow more what is existing there, with a ramp down. At the moment there are only steps, so this is obviously for improved access down into the front. And there's been a remodelling compared to the approved scheme of landscape and levels. Importantly, as the report sets out, the approved scheme had a strong intervention of a supporting wall into the eastern ramparts of the scheduled ancient monument. And obviously with any such structure you want the minimal amount of intervention. So with the second round of resource and further time to redesign, a less intrusive design has been arrived at the interaction with Southsea Castle. It still provides the necessary strength and engineering, but it's less intrusive. And so in a nutshell, there's some more attractive changes with the steps and so on, and the paths, and some rounding off of the existing grass banks. So it will appear as a better solution than existing or previously proposed. In terms of the rock toe, that is the area at the top of the beach alongside the promenade. As I said previously, that was approved as rock, which wouldn't have been seen. It would have been underneath a raised beach. That has now been engineered out, and we have the same profile of beach, but with mostly shingle instead. So clearly, in terms of engineering, it still performs the function of dissipating and controlling wave energy and protecting the seafront, but with less intervention again in terms of the steel piles and the materials. So that should result in a quicker construction, a cheaper construction, and less noise as well. So that's a benefit. Moving east along, the rock gardens are just to the north, and we have the existing steps up to be relocated. That's the same as the previous scheme. And a new ramp to go in on the eastern side, that's new. And the relocation of the shelters, the historic shelters, which we'll come to with the listed buildings as well in a moment. Whoops. So onto the eastern half, we have the Briny restaurant there, and just the lifeguard shelter to the west, just out of shot. Some remodelling is occurring at the Speaker's Corner, which is the area behind the shelters. That's just the clear tarmacked area that's popular with skateboarders. That's been remodelled for A, ramps, etc., and B, some terracing. Previously, there was a straight wall, a vertical wall, which was less attractive. It's now being stepped down, and you'll see some images in a minute, that requires more depth. So the promenade is being reduced by 2 to 3 metres from the approval, but with significant gains for the character of that particular area. The height of the promenade remains, as previously approved, 80 centimetres higher than the existing. I mean, in a nutshell, those are the principal changes. I'll take you through some more images. That's just a slightly larger scale to try and pick out the lamp columns. There are 7 of them existing. That's an existing location. It's hard for you to see. It's an open square. That would be relocated to here. So there are 7 of them. One of them is remaining in the same place, but being raised up by the 80 centimetres. Others are being relocated along the seafront, and that's the listed building application we'll come to in a moment. And then the shelters, the larger shelter at the entrance to the Rock Gardens is being bought out into the middle of the prom, and the 2 other listed shelters are being moved along to go either side of it to create a bit more of a grouping there. And the unlisted one at this location will need a separate application in due course to decide upon its future location. So again, these are the slightly more detailed plans. You can see steps, terracing, and landscaping with Pinus nigra pines. I'll skip through these perhaps and try and find you some images. There's the rock toe as previously approved, and a massive sheet pile, steel piling. So you can see much less of an intervention there, but nevertheless, obviously, performs the function of a coastal defence. And there's the higher beach compared to the existing, but that is no change from the previous approval. There's quite a lot of images now. The blacked out area is this, the CGI doesn't show all the rock gardens and so on, it's just models, so you have to try and just picture that. Clearly we're looking at the beach. Those are the new steps down into the rock gardens and the access behind it. Here's the new grouping of shelters. This is looking west. There are the pyramids and Southsea Castle at the rear. New terracing in front of the Briny, a better environment than previously approved. And the new terracing and steps and landscaping at the eastern end of Speaker's Corner. Slight reduction in space, but it is a generous space, and a generous space would remain for whatever uses, in particular skateboarding. Just a bit more detail, again looking west towards the pyramids and the rock gardens behind Speaker's Corner, dropping down there. So this is inside Speaker's Corner, looking east towards the pier. So here you can see this sort of landscaping wasn't there before. So this is another one of the clear aesthetic improvements resulting from this variation of condition application. So some terracing, effectively these become seats, and in fact it almost got a sort of amphitheatre-like effect into the this space. There it is more widely, and then with the actual steps there, and then there's a ramped access there and further to the west off the edge of the picture. Another image, so that these would be the rock gardens, not a flat lawn, as looks. New steps up, repositioned steps, repositioned principal shelter, there's a second one, and the calmer environment at the Southsea Castle. That's the eastern ramparts of Southsea Castle looking west. So this is the area of less intervention now, with just some remodelling and so on. And here's the new steps to replace the existing flood barrier, but it provides the same function clearly, and careful choice of planting appropriate to the marine environment and all the salt. There's a longer view again. There's the front of the restaurant, currently occupied by the Bryony. Because of the rising of the promenade, their view would be reduced of the sea, but that's unfortunately inevitable. But this is a much better, more attractive environment placed in front of the restaurant than previously shown. So again, you've got the nice landscaped terracing. I think that is the long and short of it. And just for completeness, there were a number of objections to the scheme as per previously. Some of them perhaps didn't quite understand the scheme and were misdirected, but we've answered them all at the back of the report there. And then as per the Supplementary Matters report now today, the SMAT, we just to clarify that one of the objections was from the volunteer lifeguards, which is just to the west of the Bryony restaurant. They were concerned about the raised height here of the promenade. Access to the lifeguard building, of course, during construction, important, and whether or not the new building could be funded and provided. On that last point, the funding doesn't provide for buildings like this restaurant to be moved or lifted up. The funding is only for sea defences, so the best has to be made of it, as, in my opinion, is being made here for that restaurant, and the lifeguard volunteer building is just behind us from the viewer's point of view. So the applicant has confirmed, as in the SMAT here, that no works will commence on this section close to the lifeguard building until after this summer, the most active period. During the construction period, there will be appropriate access maintained, of course, to the front and side of that building for practical important reasons, in particular during the next summer months, 2024, when construction will be ongoing and the lifeguards will be busier. So the report talks here about access provided apart from a 4-week period when works are adjacent. There will be hoarding around the site, possibly with windowed areas. But clearly, of course, there are ongoing discussions between the lifeguards and the City Council and Coastal Partnership, of course, to make sure that all appropriate access and operation of that facility continues as needed. I think that's it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Simon. I'll just double, because there was a Mrs. Williams, but there's nobody here to give a deputation. Just checking. Okay, no deputations. Judith, do you have a question?
Could we go back to look at the access down to the beach, and bearing in mind the fact that the shingle is moving about at a faster rate than ever, I believe, so it's going up and down during shorter periods. If you look at this here, this looks like we could either jump off onto the beach, or there are several places where there are steps down. What happens if, and is it likely, and have we looked at the whole question of whether the shingle is just going to wash away from the outside of the sheet piling and leave us with a perilous jump onto the place I like to swim?
The beach, of course, does change shape. We see that with different events, particularly in the winter, of course, and you can see where the last storm or tide has come in. And I believe the beach will still adapt and change depending on what is happening out at sea and coming in. But broadly speaking, it is, of course, modelled and engineered to withstand what is thrown at it. So the profile it becomes a bigger beach effectively. It's a higher and flatter beach than currently, which you can pretty much discern from that. The width of fairly flat beach is greater than as it can be currently, where sometimes it can drop off quite, at a point around about here, for example. So there will be movement, but the design, of course, is for the beach to remain in place and not to be washed away. That is the design.
I suppose the question is that if there is, the shingle does come and go. That's been the case ever since I've lived here, certainly. What we're seeing there on the right-hand side of the new promenade is a sort of step down. Do those steps down go quite a long way down under the shingle, or is it, how soon do we get into the sheet piling?
That's a good point. If they don't, the applicants are here today and will take that point away. I'll just see if I can find a section, but...
Yes, that's the diagram that I'm interested in, because obviously the shingle is meant to be right the way high up. And on one of the plans earlier on, it was discussed that there should be just really a lot of steps going down into the sea most of the way along, so you could sit on the steps, walk down to the shingle, regardless of the level of the shingle, obviously up to a reasonable point. Is that still the case?
Yes, I think we can discern that here. That here's the or a beach level, the long-term beach level. Clearly, the steps are going down deeper into the beach. So I think, were there to be a particular storm and more material removed, you could still get down. So I think from this drawing, the steps would be mostly, some of them would be still submerged under the beach most of the time. But should there be such a movement, then there would still be some access down to the beach. That's what this drawing suggests to me.
Thank you. That's the detail I was interested in. So that precast concrete steps runs right the way along the whole of this phase?
No, I don't think so. I think there are certain points we saw. We go back to the previous image, because most of the time, there we are. I mean, I'll just check on the plan as well.
I think at one point it was going to be that the steps extended quite a way along, so people would sit on the steps as well as using them for access and egress.
I should just, here we are. There are at periodic points, Councillor, because the beach is supposed to be, as it is now, pretty much not a small drop down from the current level. And you can see access points, or I can point them out to you. There's an access point of steps. There's another one.
I think the beach is at an unusually high level at the moment.
Another one and another one.
But
yeah,
there was. I can see the need for special types of steps to go down, because they're steps are a required level, and they might need a rail. And there are clearly a few of those. What is the finish going to be on the areas between the designated steps? It looks as if it's going to be a kind of step-like structure all the way through.
actually, looking again at the plans, I've just been pointing out ramped accesses actually, and I think actually the stepped apron, I think actually extends all the way along. Thank you, the applicant's nodding their head, so I've read that properly now. Yeah, so good access along the whole beach, Councillor.
That's what I hoped for and what I thought, and thank you very much for communicating that, because that will also provide places for people to sit, depending on the level of and also will make it easier to get lots of people on the beach easily, and I'm glad there are ramps. Thank you. That's what I needed to know.
It was a useful nod. Councillor Smith.
Could Simon just tell us a little bit more about how less abled access is going to be to the water?
Disabled access, or less abled access, yep. I'm looking at, there are ramped beached access points. I can see 4 along this section, so I don't know their profiles and so on, but I would imagine they have less abled people's access in mind, clearly. So there are 4 of those along this section, which isn't that long, so there seems to be reasonable provision there, I would hope.
Does that take them down to the water?
No, it's just just a foot or two from the promenade to the top of the beach, depending exactly how high the beach is at that time.
Is there any plans to get them down further to the water?
Not that I can see.
Yes, but I don't think it's here. But that's the thing. Claire Looney is the person who knows, and they're working on it. But I don't think it's part of this bit of the planning application.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hugh Mason.
One thing we do know about shingle is it moves. I am concerned not so much that there will be too much of a drop, but within a year or two, this will come up to the level of the promenade, and we will have shingle being driven onto the promenade. What arrangements will be made if the crest of the promenade becomes higher than the crest of the shingle becomes higher than the promenade, as we have seen to the east of South Parade Pier?
Chair, would you mind if we ask the applicant to answer that, because I don't think I'm able to?
That's very useful. You're here. Are you able to answer?
So on the existing planning approval, and we anticipate on the new planning approval, if members are minded to approve, there is a condition for a beach management strategy or beach management plan. So at the moment, the beach design has been very carefully designed on everything we know at the moment about beach movement and sort of tidal conditions. Moving forward, that's going to be monitored very closely, and then after a few years, it will be sort of revisited, if you like. So there are going to be trigger points, both if the beach falls too low or gets too high, so that the beach replenishment can be sort of tailored to what the beach is doing. I don't know if you've got anything more technical to add, Alex.
Yeah, that's correct. So the beach would be a managed beach, and it's an integral part of the cedar fences as a whole system. So we've heard already that the rock toe has been removed from the design, and the sheet piles have been shortened quite significantly. And so we need the beach to stay at a certain level to keep doing its job of acting as part of that flood defence. So it has to be monitored and it has to be managed. If it drops too low, then the cedar fences will not function as designed. So yeah, as Nikki said, we will step in and take action at various trigger points on the beach geometry.
Thank you for that clarification. The second question I have concerns the Speaker's Corner area. A number of representations have been made about the new design, that it reduces the flat area of Speaker's Corner. I can see that that will be so. How much has that been reduced?
I don't have an area figure. We'll see if that can be generated or not. I'm just trying to show it here and describe it. So this is the approved scheme. So that was more or less a triangle with the ramp. A similar ramp there. So the area eaten into by a limited amount is the terracing and so on that we've seen in the images, the planting and the terracing, with still the biggest area of the original triangle retained. So we appear to be losing a bit in this sort of area here. I'm afraid, Councillor, I don't have a figure, comparative figures of the areas of the two remaining areas of flat space. Sorry.
Okay, Councillor Smythe.
I was going to ask if it would be at all reasonable to put in a condition to allow for a longer route for wheelchairs to take down to get into the beach, following on from Councillor Smith's comments about wheelchair access. I wouldn't imagine that that would be necessary on the end of every of the steps, but whether some sort of examination of that could be put in a condition of seeing what the feasibility would be of producing a better access for those with impaired mobility and with possibly using a wheelchair to get into the sea, certainly at certain tides. And I realise that is difficult because of the shingle moving about, but I think it would be better to have a slightly more permanent thing than we've got at the moment for that sort of thing.
Okay.
Question.
Yep, it's a great yes. Can we?
Thank you. That sort of access is not in the application as I understand it, but as Councillor Vernon Jackson said, you know, that is being looked at separately. I understand that mats and tracks are the way of doing it, which are temporary, of course, so are not needing planning permission, so aren't part of today's presentation or proposals.
Councillor Sanders.
Thank you, Chris. Several of the objections, Simon, to me seem to say, well, if we reject this application, then the existing 3 listed shelters can stay where they are. It seems to me that the 2019 consent means that can't happen. Am I right?
Yeah, the listed building consents have lapsed through time. We'll come to those two in a minute as separate applications, but they were also part of the still extant overall planning permission. You know, they have been approved to be relocated as shown, and that is what is still being proposed now.
Okay, so for the objectors, even if we rejected all this today, the shelters would still be moving.
Yes, and I would hope we wouldn't reject them.
I understand that, Simon, but it's just for the objectors.
That's right, yeah.
That's fine. With regards to paragraph 73, where you talk about the need to have extra planting, which is something I would support, to me, the conditions that you talk about trees and stuff like that, talk about the preservation of existing trees as opposed to extra planting. Is that your reading of those conditions? Because if it isn't, if it is, then I'm sure we would like to have an extra one to back up your paragraph 73 included.
I think elsewhere in the report, I can't see it exactly. It does say that the degree of detail for things like planting is something that's still to be worked up by way of conditions that will be attached again. So what's been shown are general areas of proposed or amended planting, pine trees and other species, for example. And so there's been some debate about this particular area, but as for the content of that particular area, that is still to be worked up very carefully between the applicants and our landscaping team and the planners. So, you know, the most appropriate species and robustness, etc., will be depend on the exact area proposed.
But a condition outlining that we as a committee would support the principle of that and just leave the technicalities of it all to the teams is reasonable.
Well, I mean, that's effectively what's proposed in front of you already.
Right. Okay. Okay, that's fine. And my final point is just a technical one. The letters A, E, and P are repeated 3 times in the report. What is it? As there's no explanation of what it is. It sounds like it's a significant flood event from the context of it, but just a technical thing. And if you don't know, I'm sure the Coastal Partners team would know.
Yeah, I'll try and have a go, but I probably won't know. Do you have a paragraph number, please?
Thank you, Hugh. It's 2018 and also 15.
Thank you. I shall look to the applicant.
I thought you might.
Yep, so the letters AEP stand for Annual Exceedance Probability. So that is the likelihood in any year that an event will occur.
Right. Thank you for that. That was beautiful. Thank you very much. Those are my questions, Chris.
Darren, you are a repeat offender of keeping your microphone on, by the way. I know you may want to hog the live stream, but please do let other people have their moment. Okay, Councillor Vernon Jackson.
The bit of feedback I've had is concern about the loss of the shelter at Speaker's Corner. I know there is a proposal that there will be a shelter. Can we see where that is going to go? I see my colleagues on the other side of the room looking if they can give us an answer.
I'll try. So, yeah, the long shelter at Speaker's Corner, which runs at the back of the prom, is proposed to be removed and was approved to be removed, and that remains the proposals in front of you. You've seen where the landscaping and the steps and so on would go in more or less in the place of Speaker's Corner, those shelters. But the intention is, as the report sets out, there is a public intention of the local authorities to erect some sort of similar shelter along elsewhere. So it's to come whether or not, but the current proposals are removing the existing.
Yes, that's correct. As part of our scheme, that long shelter is to be removed, but I believe there are discussions going on outside of the coastal defences, outside of the planning process, to look at putting in an alternative shelter, but that's something that's very separate to our scheme.
Thank you. Any more? Look pensive. Okay. Members, comments? Councillor Vernon Jackson.
Thanks. On the whole, I think it's very sensible, but I'd like to add a condition that there is a commitment to replace the shelter at Speaker's Corner so that that can continue to be used.
Councillor Mason.
May I ask from Councillor Vernon Jackson, does he mean retain the existing shelter or produce some form of shelter at Speaker's Corner? Because that would influence the way I would vote on that.
I don't think we need to be prescriptive.
So long as we're not prescriptive, and because I think the removal of the current shelter is advantageous in that it allows the landscaping to run up to the sea. But I would take your point that some form of shelter needs to be provided further along at some point in that particular vicinity, but not what we've got at the moment.
And it might reuse some of it, but I don't think we should be prescriptive.
Okay, so long as you're not prescriptive, I will second the proposal.
Okay, thank you. Darren, is that what you were going to do? Yeah. Okay. Any other comments? No?
Yeah, on the major element of this, which is the reconfiguration of the defence works on the seaward side, I think this is greatly a great improvement on what we had before, in that the use of shingle and a much wider expanse of shingle will make a much more attractive seafront and should be, from what we hear, do exactly the same job in preventing overtopping and flooding. So I think that this is definitely a considerable improvement.
Well, thank you very much. Simon?
Thank you, Chair. I would just say that the proposal for a condition to replace the shelter being removed somewhere else in the scheme, I don't think is possible, I'm afraid. It's not a part of the proposal. It's not, I think, necessary in planning terms. As Councillor Mason said, there's a betterment, a judgment, but officers share that opinion that there's a betterment from the replacement landscaping, hard and soft. And where would it go, and what publicity would it require for a correctly made decision? What other consultations would it require, etc., etc. So we can't, I'm afraid, just add on a condition and leave it open-ended like that. That's my advice.
Simon, can you also clarify whether that particular shelter is a listed structure?
It is not.
It is not, okay.
Well, so Kieran, what do we do?
I agree with the officer's advice in that I don't think it's it's not a necessary condition, as Simon has said, but it's not particularly precise either. Of course, the removal of that structure under this planning permission does not prevent the council in some other guise coming back and proposing a structure in future, but it's not part of this application. I would be loath to start interfering with the detail, given that this has gone through environmental impact assessment as well. Yeah.
Okay. Judith first, and then Gerald.
A comment following up on my previous questions about wheelchair access. Under paragraph 24, there is, of course, this very useful categorisation and list of all the accesses. Is it possible that the vehicle and pedestrian access near to the Speaker's Corner at a 1 in 21 gradient would go down far enough to be helpful to people using wheelchairs? And could such a something in brackets in the condition around those things be put in to ensure that that could be used by pedestrians and vehicles? Obviously, bringing those life-saving boats up and down, lifeboats up and down there, shouldn't be allowed to be affected by that, but that seems to me that would be one solution to the problem of getting people in wheelchairs down to the sea.
There was somewhere between a question and a comment. So.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm not familiar with 1 to 21 and what sort of gradient that is for in terms of disabled access, but possibly that's such a level of detail, excuse me, although there's some detail in the report. Could I suggest that the applicant is here and it's such a level of detail that it continues to be worked upon and refined as part of the detailed conditions?
Thank you. As long as they have listened and taken account. Thank you.
Councillor Vernon Jackson.
Thanks. Thank you for the advice about putting on a condition. I remain of the view that it's very important to put that condition on. Kieran, if you would like it to be more precise, what wording would you find helpful?
Well, I'll be looking to you as the member with the better local knowledge of the area and of the shelter. I'm going to struggle to help you with that.
Okay, so the wording I would then use would be that a shelter is provided as part of any redevelopment of the Speaker's Corner area.
Simon, is there anything you would add to that?
Unfortunately, I return, excuse me, I return to my earlier advice around the procedural correctness and possibilities of requiring further development that no one else has had an opportunity to comment upon. It's not part of the technical environmental impact assessment. It's not part of the application. A local authority granting consent for something that hasn't been properly publicised, can lay itself open to challenge for not having followed the correct procedures, as well as quite apart from, will it actually work out? Is it appropriate or not, etc., etc. So I'm afraid my advice remains that it really shouldn't be done. But Kieran's earlier point that the council, indeed the coastal partnerships, are still looking at that outside of this application is the way to go, I believe.
Gerald, do you want to come back?
Yes, I think
progress.
Of course, it's going to have to go through the normal planning process, as anything would do. But I think it's very important that we make the intention clear of what we want there. It's not a prescriptive condition. It doesn't say it's got to look exactly like this, that, or the other. It doesn't say exactly where it's got to be. My worry is if you say we can't have this condition, you push me into a position of saying I have to vote against the application.
Just to get a sense of the room. Everybody else, what's your thoughts about the condition?
I'm sort of with the planning officer really, that I think there's a bit of a worry that knowing previously that residents across there were worried about heights if it was going to change. There was talk about it years ago about maybe doing something to that shelter. It makes it a bit ambiguous if you say you're going to move it. Well, where are you going to move it? Is it going to be a different height? I understand what Councillor Gerald Vernon Jackson was saying about that you can deal with all that in planning, but I think it muddies the waters personally.
Any other thoughts, Darren?
It looks as if that this impasse is going to continue, which is concerning. I'm with Gerald. I would much rather keep a shelter there because I think it's part of how that area would look in future, and it's nice to keep things. It's not listed, so therefore it's irrelevant to the listed building consents that are coming later. If necessary, we may include it as an informative to say that it is the desire of the committee and relay that very clearly and explicitly to Coastal Partners. It is the desire of the committee and the expectation of the committee, I should say, not desire, that a shelter will be provided at Speaker's Corner. And that may get us round the impasse.
Hugh, then Judith.
Listening to what has been said, I think that an informative statement would be appropriate in this point, and thus we would come back to the proposal as originally set, in which case, since Councillor Vernon Jackson appears very unwilling to propose that without a condition, I would like to propose the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Hugh. Judith?
I'd like to second that, but I do think some sort of informative about a shelter, which, frankly, the current shelter is not beautiful, and it does stop the lovely landscaping that's proposed in this would be significantly affected if we tried to replace it, and we absolutely don't want that as far as I'm concerned. But a form of shelter there would be useful for people who want to put the bags down when they're skateboarding and so on and so forth. That's not an appropriate use of the historic structures that face the other way on the seafront, although they'll be kind of very accessible from there. So, but I'd like to second Councillor Mason's proposal and hope that we can come to some agreement about an appropriate, modern, durable, small shelter there.
Indeed. John, did you have something to add?
I just concur with those last two sentiments.
Right, okay, well, we've had a full discussion about this. We have a proposal and a seconder. Joan?
Well, I think I had a proposal, which I don't know if there's if Hugh is withdrawing his seconding, I don't know if there is somebody else who will second it. If not, mine inevitably falls.
Anybody? I think that falls. Okay, we have a proposal. Kieran, you can, absolutely.
So I think the suggestion of informative is really sensible, and additionally, perhaps as it's something that falls outside of this scheme, you could even look to get a new shelter provided for under community infrastructure level spend as an idea for an informative.
Gerald didn't want to be prescriptive, and I don't think any of us want to be prescriptive on the hows, the whys, or the whats. The key thing is that it's very clear to Coastal Partners that it's the expectation of this committee that a shelter will be provided there.
So on that basis, the only motion still standing is Councillor Mason, seconded by Councillor Smythe, wasn't it? Yeah.
Okay, I think with those in favour of the motion on the table with the informative. Against? I think that's it.
And the motion passes in accordance with the officer's recommendation plus the informative.
Thank you, Kieran. Russell, you need to leave. In terms of the mass exodus, everybody else is okay for another half an hour or so. Is that right? Thank you. Shall we move on?
Should we do the listed building stuff? Because it probably isn't. We don't probably need a discussion on that.
And the presentation, seemed to go on for a long time. Okay, item 5. I'll move the officer's recommendation. Judith, seconding. In favour, unless there's any other, then we're going to rattle through this.
Listed building consent was granted.
Item 6. I shall move the officer's recommendation. Darren, seconded. Anybody else? No, those in favour?
Listed building consent was granted.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. Does anybody want a leg stretch? I know people have got to go in half an hour. I know people have got to go in half an hour. Okay, right, yes, sorry. Okay, let's very desperate. Should we try and get another one done? Okay, let's move on to Station Road. Well, we're just waiting for the technology to kick in. So we'll core it, aren't we? Yeah. So, if you want to risk not being able to contribute. What is it really? Milton Road. So Councillor Sanders can give his deputation before everybody goes off to do more exciting things than be here.
Sorry, I didn't know if the applicant had made a deputation or not. Or Simon had presented anything or not.
No. Oh my goodness me, it's a bit of sort of end of term going on. Simon, over to you for the presentation, please. Milton Road.
Sorry, everyone, and thank you for your patience. 108 Milton Road, an application for a change of use from a Class C3 dwelling house to a house in multiple occupation for 8 people, which is sui generis. This is just north of the former prison site in that part of town, on the gyratory with Milton Road running north and then Baffins Road running south on the other side, just south of the Rose in June pub there. The blue-edged land is land that the applicant owns, which consists of a building that is just awaiting legal agreement for mitigation for the protection areas, and then will be granted planning consent under delegated powers for its extension and conversion into flats. That building, you'll see it in a moment. And then there is an access to a rear yard also within the applicant's ownership. And then the application site here is the existing dwelling that is proposed for change of use. So there's the yard at the back and the access. That's the access on the left, down between the buildings. This is the application site. And the building on the right is the commercial building that, as I say, is close to getting planning permission for its extension upwards and conversion into 4 flats, just for completeness. There's a slightly side view. So this is the existing house. Under permitted development rights, the property has already had roof extensions, alongside dormer, I should say, on the south side there, and the same on the north side, facing across the pub, to provide windows up there. Internally, the existing floor and ceiling has been taken out and lowered, so they're able to insert a new story to achieve 3 stories. The site, as the report sets out, had planning permission to convert into a Class C3 or C4 flexible use, but that has not yet been implemented. Hence this application from C3, it's direct to HMO sui generis for 8 people. The side, as we saw before, the access is on the off the vehicle access to get into the building. There's no front door, it's a side door there into the house, and you would emerge into a sort of dumbbell communal area with a kitchen on one side and the communal room on t'other. And then the rest of the property has bedrooms with en-suites throughout, 8 bedrooms, 1 at the back, 1 at the front. There's also a communal toilet there downstairs, a 3rd bedroom, a 4th bedroom, a big one there, a 5th bedroom, 6, 7 and 8 bedrooms in total. While we're looking at the layout, in terms of your SPD guidance, the rooms are all particularly large. This is on page 84 or table 812. The bedrooms are all particularly large, which means the communal kitchen dining area can be exceeding the 22.5 measurement. It is way beyond that at 31, and then all the en-suites, etc. So in terms of living accommodation on size standards alone, it offers a spacious property, and then because they're all good size rooms and so on, there's no difficulty in terms of the layout of any of the rooms, either, including the dumbbell sort of almost split rooms that you see on each level. But I think that's pretty much as existing as well because of the stairs through the middle of the property. So in terms of internal arrangements and living accommodation, officers are happy with the standard accommodation. There are some elevations to show the physical changes to the building under permitted development. Here's the HMO count. No other HMOs found in the area in the 50-metre radius. So this one would provide 1, which would provide a figure of 1.92, so within the 10% threshold, indicative threshold for a sustainable community. We have 4 objections: setting out parking, local infrastructure, and then Councillor Sanders, of course, has called it in for decision. There are no supplementary matters, so unless I've forgotten anything, those are the key points for you.
Thank you, Simon. Cariana, are you ready? Over to you.
Good morning, or afternoon actually. As you'll all be aware, because I stand up here and sort of talk about this every month, at Apical PDM we always strive to achieve the best shared living designs for both our clients and ultimately the residents of the property. This particular property is no exception and exceeds all the high standards put in place by Portsmouth City Council. When this property was purchased, the building was in an extremely poor state of repair and the current tenants have found somewhere else to live. The property had a number of issues with leaks, mould and damp, and required a significant amount of money spending on the property in order to bring the property up to a livable standard. Our applicant in purchasing this property and spending in excess of £150,000 on the renovation will result in being able to offer 8 individuals good quality accommodation finished to a high standard for which there is a need in Portsmouth. Not only will the property provide an excellent standard of accommodation, but the applicant has ensured the longevity of the property, thus ensuring the property did not lay vacant and unfit for purpose. It's important to remember a 10% HMO density restriction has been put in place by Portsmouth City Council to ensure mixed and balanced communities remain. There are no other HMO properties within the 50-metre radius of this property. Therefore, it can be argued that there is a lack of shared properties available in this area for which there is a need. In addition to this, as noted in the officer's report for committee, the Council cannot currently demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply. Therefore, any planning decisions should be based in favour of sustainable development. If this proposal is approved today, this would be a positive contribution to the shortfall of housing in the city. The HMO, which will be finished to a high standard, will be required to have weekly fire alarm checks and will be inspected regularly. This will ensure any possible issues will be promptly dealt with. The property will also be professionally managed. It would not be within the applicant's interest to allow the property to be poorly tenanted and poorly managed due to the time and money spent on renovating the property. The application complies with policy PCS 17, PCS 20 and PCS 23 of the local plan and also complies with the Housing and Multiple Occupation Supplementary Planning Document 2019. All of the bedrooms are significantly in excess of the 6.5 square metre bedroom requirement, with most more than double the size required. All the bedrooms have benefit from an ensuite shower room. The property is required to have 22.5 square metres of communal area, and this particular property provides 31.42, which again is significantly larger than the requirement. The planning officer has recommended this fully compliant application for approval today, and I ask you all to fully support this recommendation. To refuse such a fully compliant application will result in increased workload, time and cost for all those involved in subsequently taking this to appeal. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Darren, over to you.
Thank you, Chris. I am representing my residents, many of whom live near the site and also who live on Baffins Road as well. First, I want to thank Mr. Turner and the planning team for their efforts in resolving issues with regards to parking relating to the prison site. I'm very grateful. Local people are particularly concerned around any development that will lead to increased parking, and that was something that one of the reasons why myself and Councillor Stagg objected to the prison, and it drives my comments about this application today. I was very interested to read the highways comments in the committee report. I have the highways comments to the planning portal in front of me, and I want to quote 2 particular paragraphs in there. The first is that Milton Road is primary route travelling north to south, which is made up of predominantly residential properties. Parking are accommodated through restricted on-street parking. The demand for parking on-street regularly exceeds the space available, particularly in the evenings and weekends. My emphasis. Another paragraph. No parking survey information has been submitted to demonstrate on-street capacity if additional demand resulting from the development can be accommodated within a 200-metre walking distance of the application site. Therefore, there is the potential for increased instances of residents driving around the area hunting for a parking space, although is an issue of residential amenity. This could justify a reason for refusal, my emphasis, and consequently you should give this due weight in your determination of the planning application. Now, you may have seen those words elsewhere, because when we get to 37 Toronto Road, those are the words that are used with regards to an objection from the Highways Authority for that development. Now, why does that matter here? Well, through no fault of the applicants and no fault of anyone else, each of the residents in the new HMO will be paying council tax, and that means each of the residents will get a parking permit. So that's not 2, that's 8 new parking permits for the site. Which, now, Karen and I may find that situation sad, because we don't believe people in HMOs should be paying council tax, but that is the situation we find ourselves in. So therefore, I think it is only fair and right that this committee looks at that because of the words of the Highways Authority, which is that this could justify a reason for refusal, and consequently you should give this due weight in your determination of the planning application. Parking spaces are at a premium in the parking zone, the HA parking zone that covers Milton Road and the roads around it. This, in my view, will make it worse, and that is why I think at the very least you should be looking at refusing this application, not least because I think if we impose a limit on it, that will fail at appeal. There is additionally what is called in the report the fallback position, which is transferring to a 6-bedroom HMO. Although I note that this has already been passed in November 2021, I would draw colleagues' attention to the fact that the communal kitchen and dining area is smaller than our space standards, which is at 31.71 square metres, when the relevant space standards for the development are 34. So as far as I can see with this scheme, it creates disproportionate traffic impact, which in the words of the Highways Officer could justify a reason for refusal, and the fallback position doesn't meet all of our space standards, which is a matter of concern for local residents. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Darren. You asked us to consider refusal at the very least. I'm not sure what more we can do. Questions?
Thanks. Could I ask Mr. Turner, my reading of the papers says that the communal kitchen dining area is in excess of what is required. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Questions? Comments?
I have a great deal of sympathy with Councillor Sanders' position. I think parking is a real issue, but my understanding is that we have not been able to sustain refusals on the parking grounds, and therefore I don't think we can do that. All the bedrooms are large and are above our space standards. I don't see a route for being able to turn this down which is sustainable, and therefore I'm happy to propose the officer recommendation.
Linda's seconded. Hugh,
I'd like to second that.
Oh, Hugh. Sorry.
I think somebody else got in front of you.
It seems to me that what we have here is a very good proposal. All the rooms are of good size. The access is good. It is on a bus route. I think the chances of getting it sustaining any objection on parking, if the applicant we were to turn it down, the applicant would take it to the planning inspectorate, are slightly less than 0. And so I think that this is of itself a very good conversion and a very good use of a property. And so I second that, second the proposal.
George.
Do we have any way in which we can restrict the number of occupants of the property? I know that the application is for a sui generis 8 people. Does that in itself limit the number of occupants, because they are 8 double bedrooms in the property, which could allow, in theory, up to 16 people living in the property.
Yeah, good.
That's just my... Sorry?
Simon, we've had this.
Yeah, as per previous discussions, Councillor Fielding, in previous occasions the number of people is in the development description, but should members wish, they could apply a condition that sets it out very, very clearly. Maximum limitation of 8 persons.
I'd be very happy to amend my proposal to include that.
Okay, all right. Any other comments? Excuse me. Okay, so we have a proposal, seconded by, I think Linda actually got in first. I do apologise here. With the condition. Those in favour?
That was unanimous approval.
Excellent, thank you. I'm aware of the 1 o'clock exodus. So those, I think those, if those want to leave, leave. Yes? No? Are we? Nails? Sorry? Are you okay? I don't know how desperate people are to leave to do other things. If it goes over 1 o'clock, don't blame me. Okay, Station Road.
Thank you, Chair. Application at 163 Station Road, Drayton, change of use from a Class C3 dwelling house to a flexible C3 stroke C4 HMO. Up in Drayton there, tucked away, that is the new Drayton Dairies, former Drayton Dairies development site, hence the sort of unresolved layout. And there's the railway line. You can just see where the 2 railway lines are joining there, if you can picture that, up in Drayton. So it's this post-war housing development tucked away in that area. So this is a spur off Station Road here, a little cul-de-sac effectively. And the property's got a front garden and a rear splayed garden to the side and rear. There it is. So a forecourt there. That's splayed in width, gets wider, closer you get to the house, and then a garden to the side and rear. No physical changes. The property has an existing ground floor bedroom, as it happens. That is shown retained. A separate kitchen, a living room, and a conservatory. The conservatory has is brick built up to sort of waist height, so one of those slightly more substantial conservatories. So no change in terms of the use of the rooms or any other physical changes. And then 3 bedrooms upstairs and a bathroom. Did I point out the downstairs loo, shared loo? There are the elevations. And that's the rear conservatory, as I mentioned, with some more substantial than just a plain glass one. Those are the slides. In terms of local mix, sustainable community, there is one other HMO. I don't think we have the slide. No, we don't. But the other HMO is just tucked away opposite. So within the 50 square metres, 50 radius, it's 2.17 currently. This would double that to 4.35. It's a small number of properties in the area in the 50 metre radius, hence the changes. But it's still at 4.35, so within the 10% guideline threshold for a sustainable community. And then in terms of the layout, if I nip across to the SMAT, apologies, we had a typo in the room sizes in paragraph 5.8. Bedroom 3 is actually 13 squared metres. So on that table, the bedrooms are all bigger than required. The bedrooms 1, 2 and 3 are all much bigger than required, and bedroom 4 is just a bit bigger. The shared bathroom is absolutely fine, as is the ground floor WC. The living room, there in the middle, at 22 square metres, is bigger than the 14 metres required. This is unusual, less usual for us to have separate rooms. Normally, of course, we have a communal living kitchen room in Victorian properties, Edwardian properties. Here we've got 3 separate rooms. The conservatory at 15 square metres as a second living room is a square metre larger than required. And then the kitchen at 7 square metres is 4 square metres short of the expected size. So we deal with that in the report. Although the kitchen is short, it's a rectangle, it's a good shape, it's not long and thin or anything like that, so it's usable in there. It is a bit smaller, but then by simple balancing out, the other 2 rooms are slightly bigger. The conservatory and the living room much bigger than proposed, so any extra storage space, for example, could be accommodated in one of the other living rooms. And of course all the bedrooms are a very good size, so we didn't think it was something that should be withheld planning consent. We think it's an overall satisfactory arrangement for up to 6 people. The application has come to committee because of 8 letters of objection. Concentration of HMOs in the area, parking, antisocial behaviour, living space, retrospective application and a fire risk. I think we've dealt with those through the reports. You can see on-street parking isn't necessary as it has its own parking forecourt there. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Members, questions? Judith.
Is there any cycle storage?
Not shown, but we've asked for that by condition.
Two questions. The first one concerns the conservatory. Conservatories can either be living space or not be living space, depending on how they're constructed. How is this one roofed?
Thank you, Councillor.
Because really, that's my... Depending on what the roof is, it'll either be living space or somewhere where you would not wish to spend your winter afternoons.
Those plans indicate glazing, and then I've got an aerial photograph, and it does indeed look like glazing of some sort, whether it's a sort of plastic type or a glass type, I'm not sure. So the orientation just is northwest. So in terms of overheating, it wouldn't catch the sun until afternoon, so it's not a south-facing conservatory. In terms of whether or not it would get warm enough, Councillor, that's a matter of judgment.
Okay, I'm a bit concerned about that. My second question concerns your report. 5.7. If the property is operated as a Class C4 small HMO, this would have an effect on the ratio of communal and amenity space compared to private bedroom space available internally for future occupants. Can you unpack that a little for me, please?
Struggling to, Councillor. I obviously read it before. I'm not quite sure what the case officer was trying to say here.
Or am I?
I'm not entirely sure, but really I think beyond that, I don't know if we can perhaps disregard that sentence if none of us can quite understand it, and we move on to the rest of it that I hope I have taken you through and is a bit clearer. Sorry, Councillor.
comments? Councillor Sanders.
Thank you. I wish to move the Office of Recommendations. This is one of the few HMOs that whereby it seems to be exactly the same as it is now, and so therefore there's no way in the universe that this can or should be turned down. Thank you.
Anybody wish to second? John? Any alternative views and thoughts? No? Okay, we have a proposal on the table. Those in favour? Against? Abstentions? Okay.
Planning permission is granted in accordance with the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Kieran, and you were quite right to do that application. We finished before 1 o'clock. You were quite right. Those of you who need to leave, please do. Okay. And we shall move on to Toronto Road.
I have 25 minutes before I need to go.
Thank you, Chairman. 37 Toronto Road, first floor side extension, which would then be converted to form a 2-bedroom dwelling. So we're in the Fratton area of the city. That's the main north-south road there, not far to Fratton train station, etc., further south. So we're just in off the local centre in this part of Fratton. These are the current property would be retained within the blue edge, and the application site is the red edge next door. This is perhaps more helpful. The property has the side garage here, constructed under previous consent, so it's effectively sort of double width, perhaps you could say, compared to the rest of the terrace. And the application is to build on top of that garage and convert that space into a dwelling. There we are. So build here and convert that into a dwelling. So the current house would lose some of its current space. There's the side. There is an access off Balliol Road here, currently quite wide, that provides enough space for 2 cars. We address this in the report. Effectively, only 1 space could be relied upon for the new occupiers because of the conflict between 2 different users of the same drive, and you know, parking in front of each other's houses and driving to and fro, and parallel tandem parking. So that is an issue. That's why it's come to planning committee, because an objection from the local highways authority. There's the rear of the site, so a relatively small back garden. This would be built up. There's a mini substation next to it. No problems with the utility consulted. There's the existing front. The single-storey garage will be built up and converted with elevational changes to form that new dwelling. So the existing side wall will be built up into that dwelling. I'm afraid the plan drawer has rotated the plans. It doesn't help. There's the front on the existing property. So that's the garage they built, and with a side extension effectively, and the flat roof above. If you can flip it through 180 degrees, the garage will be converted into a living kitchen room there, and the new build above would provide 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. The space standards, national space standards, are met. We consider that a development in that area is fine in terms of streetscape, and indeed a previous extension was granted there not so many years ago. So we're quite happy with the standard of accommodation and the appropriateness of a further storey and conversion into a house at that location. Some objections, well, one letter of objection about parking, and we have the Highways Authority concerned there. Given that it's in a very sustainable location, with all the local amenities just off to the west on the local shopping centre, buses, train station down the road, the city centre. You know, we're right in the middle of the island here. We didn't think a reason for refusal on parking could be sustained. I've been up a couple of times during the week to see what evening parking is like. It is busy, it's full. There were the odd space. I found a couple there and one there and one there. But I wouldn't argue that there's acres of on-street parking available. So that is the one issue that I haven't quite seen eye to eye with the Local Highways Authority, but with the importance of providing new housing and the sustainable location, we do feel we can support it as officers. No updates, and I don't think any deputations.
Thank you, Simon. Members, questions? Councillor Bernard-Jackson.
To be fair to them, that's the officers. They've simply noted that the application form says there are 3 parking spaces, and they've said, well, that's not shown. Then the officers have gone on to say, well, you can physically fit 2 cars on there, one in front of the other. But once you have a new house here, so the host property, if he wants to park in front of it, he or she wants to park in front of their house, they've got to get past the other car. So that's not really going to work, is it? 2 different. It might work informally. Sorry, and that's perfectly. But in terms of our formal consideration, and then if approved, the owner of the new property, would he be allowed to park in front of his neighbour? Don't know. We have to assume not. So that's why we said, really, realistically, we can only rely upon 1 parking space, although 2 might be workable informally.
It seems that's a difference of view between people with common sense and traffic officers.
Okay. John.
Sorry, just following on from that. At the back of the property, there's on our drawing in our pack, and there's sort of a bold outline, and there's sort of a little bit of an inlet there. Is that a space, or is that something we could put another?
That's the substation. There or there, yeah.
So let's not go there. Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Gerald?
I'd give permission, but I'd ask them to work out a way in which you can get 2 cars off street, which they'll do anyway because it's common sense. It'll make the property more valuable.
John?
I was just going to say, I know there's boundary issues when you draw up a new contract on the new house, but you might be able to put a covenant in there so they could drive across and do that. That might be something.
Okay, proposer. I'll second. Okay. Any other views? No? Okay, those in favour?
That's unanimous. Grants Planning Commission.
Thank you, Kieran. Let's move to Bath Road.
Thank you, Chair. This is an application for lawful development certificate, 119 Bath Road, for a rear dormer and roof lights to the front roof slope. This application is only at committee because the applicant is a member of staff at the City Council. It is the 5th property there, because the red dot is on the 2 of them. It's the 5th one here. Traditional terrace property just south of Devonshire. You might recognise that building where the island splits. So this is simply it. There's the front roof slope dormer, roof light that sits below the 1.5 metre maximum plane, so it's within the tolerances of the permitted development order, so that does not require planning consent. and the rear dormer similarly is of sufficiently small size, doesn't front the highway, it's matching materials, etc. So that too similarly does not require planning consent. So the application for confirmation that the development is indeed lawful without the need for planning permission should be granted, the certificate.
Okay. Questions, comments? I shall move the officer's recommendation. Gerald, are you seconding? Those in favour?
That was unanimous approval.
Thank you, Kieran. That concludes our business today, I think, and I shall close the meeting at 13:09, I think. Thereabouts. Thank you.